All right, well, today we have the K24 swap Cefiro in the shop, and we are trying to get this thing back up and running on the road here in less than a week. Assuming that parts ordering, parts shipping cooperates with us, I think that's a doable timeline. This thing's been on the back burner for way too long, and I'm excited to have it back up and running, finished out, and really better than ever. We've made a lot of changes. So if you're unfamiliar with this project, basically we built this about 1.5 years ago, enjoyed it, car worked really well, but eventually we found the limits of the stock bottom end, sent a rod through the block, set the car on fire, and made a big mess for ourselves to clean up. So we got a lot of that work done while we were waiting for some parts for the vet build, and then it just kind of went to the back burner again. And now we finally got some time to properly finish this thing out, and we are super close. I mean, we are on the home stretch of getting this thing back on the road. So last episode, we got it to the point where we could try to start it, and unfortunately it fired right up. First time starting with this motor, because this is now a built bottom end that I put together with a built head, but also the first time this car's had a running engine, and right at 1 year since we blew it up. So it's again been sitting on the back burner for a while, so I'm really excited to get it back on the road and start enjoying it again. So that being said, since we were already taking the car apart, since we were replacing things and fixing it, we got kind of caught up in the while you're there's and decided to make some changes to the setup overall with the built motor and a different transmission, along with the intake and intercooler setup. All of those changes mean that a lot of the parts that worked on here before that we built when we built the car originally are no longer going to work. The biggest one of those things being the exhaust. So I built the entire exhaust for this thing, including the downpipe and the wastegate recirc when I put the car together originally. Now, fortunately, the downpipe still works, still fits, all is well there. The rear section back here that goes by the diff and the axle, that still works. The only thing that doesn't work is this long section that goes between the two. When I built this, I tried to keep it as tucked up as possible, but it was built around a different transmission and a different transmission mount. So with the T56 setup we have in this car and the transmission mount we built for that, it doesn't fit anymore, and that's where I want to start. It's definitely painful to hack up something that you spent a lot of time on during the original build, but we got to do what we got to do to get an exhaust on this thing. So that being said, if I want to get this thing done, I need to quit jibber jabbering and we need to get to work. So let's lift this thing up and start cutting, chopping, fitting, welding. You know the deal. Well, actually, Josue managed to make some time to stop by, and I wanted to take advantage of while he was here and knock out a bunch of these odds and ends. You know, these are the projects that we can each tackle different projects at a time and just knock them out one by one. These things are the ones that can take a lot of time and be very, very tedious. So the first thing we did was redo our battery cable situation. When we did fire this thing up, we had some battery cables off my Corvette chassis and a battery sitting on the ground. So that was the first thing I wanted to rectify. So we were working on getting a battery cable ran to the back, and while Josue was doing that, getting it clamped up and all of that, I wanted to get the clutch lines on. We have most of the clutch situation figured out finally. This was a big mystery with this transmission because I can't find anyone who's done this transmission behind this engine. So I had to come up with my own solution. I want to know if it's going to work, because if it doesn't work, it's a big setback, and we need to figure that out now so we can start looking for an alternative. So I got the little parts and pieces I needed to finish the clutch lines. I got those in. Josue got the battery cable ran to the back for us to relocate the battery back there for this rendition. And then it was time for the moment of truth, put some clutch fluid in it and bleed the clutch. Now, luckily we have this really long remote bleeder line. I do these on all these cars that have this type of throw-up bearing setup. It's amazing because you can bleed right back to the throw-up bearing without having to ever drain the fluid or have two people. You can really do it by yourself. It is great. So with that done, we've got a working clutch. Seemingly, the clutch pedal does things. So now we need to move on to some of the other odds and ends. You know, again, these parts of the project will eat up your time. So it's good to take some time and just tackle them one by one. And it's very rewarding because you kind of make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. So I got the intercooler fans back on. Josue started working on getting the front end back on, and my shift lever finally came in. I don't know why, but I'm just really excited to see what this looked like in the car. So I wanted to get it mocked up in there. Now, these use American thread bolts, standard thread bolts. I mostly have pretty much all metric stuff. So I did have one pack of bolts that I had got from my vet because it uses the same threads, and you have to trim them. They're a little bit too long. So anyway, we got those trimmed up so that we could bolt the shift lever in, see if everything still works, see if the shift boot and stuff works, get the knob on, and then see what the whole combination looks like in the car, all complete, one full unit. I don't know why, but I just absolutely love the way this thing looks in this car. I love the mismatchness of it. I don't know why, but it does something for me, and I was excited to see the complete picture with it installed. All right, well, we've been making some pretty good progress on this thing. Now, obviously, I wanted to start on the exhaust. That was my intention, but since Josue was here, all the stuff that he could do was up top, which you obviously can't get to if the car's all the way up on the lift because I'm working on the exhaust. So we decided to start there and started knocking out these little projects, and we've made pretty dang good headway. We've got the whole front end back together. Went together nice and easy. Hasn't been on since we painted the bay. The only thing we couldn't get on was, unfortunately, the front bumper. So since we blew up the last engine in here, even though it was over in a split second, we definitely sent shrapnel through the oil system. Now, the problem with that is if we hook everything back up, we still have shrapnel in the oil system. It goes through this engine and then toast it. That's bad news. You don't want that. So when we put the car back together, we did all new lines. We did a new oil cooler, new everything. Now, the downside is we did it without the front end on. So we made this line a little bit too short, just a slight oversight. We can't get the bumper bracket back on. This one line's in the way. So we're gonna have to switch that line around, redo it, make it a little longer. Aside from that though, front end complete. We've got our clutch working. That is a huge, huge relief to have a working, functioning clutch. We've verified it with Josue spinning the slip yoke to make sure it was engaging and disengaging. For whatever reason, for me, a working clutch is always like the signifier that a build is almost done or almost ready to drive. When you can get in here, press the pedal and have a clutch, that's how you know you're close. So we also got our shift lever in. That came in today. Pretty freaking pumped on that. I don't know what it is, but I love these Hurst chrome shift levers. And I was so excited to see what it looked like in this car. Just a very American shift lever and shift ball in an otherwise very JDM inspired car. I don't know, I'm weird. For some reason I enjoy that. Aside from that, we also got our power cable situation figured out. Debated on this for a while. We got our distribution block, we got our wire running all the way back to the trunk. Now, when we built this car originally, I was adamant on keeping the battery in the front. I want to change my inlet setup to the turbo, and the only way to do that is to open up some space over here to run it over this way. Just one of those things, we gotta do what we gotta do. We gotta go with the rear battery, but we're gonna do it right, and it shouldn't be too much of a sacrifice in the street car department, and it works out because I stole the battery that I had for this car for the vet, so I could put two batteries in it, which meant we were able to go a little larger on the battery for this car, because we're putting it in the back anyway. So here is our new excess power battery. We went with a D1200. What we had was a D925, which is this exact shape. This is a capacitor. So this one's a little bit bigger overall, but still really, really small and compact. I have become a huge fan of excess power batteries. I actually got my first one for this car because I wanted to keep the battery in the front. And it was the smallest battery I could find that still seemed like it was gonna be strong enough to start the car and run the car. And it worked incredibly well. Moral of the story is big fan of excess power batteries. If you need a good AGM battery, in my opinion, they are the best. They're definitely the best I have tried. So anyway, point is, we need to get this guy back in the trunk, figure out how to mount it, terminate our cables, and then we'll have our electrical system sorted out. That's the goal, at least. That's like a perfect fit. Like really, we just need a bracket to hold it down. We're not gonna go too crazy, and it stays nice and low below the floor here. That is perfect. So we started finishing out our battery cables. Since we already had this one routed to the back, we just needed to cut it, terminate it, and put an end on it. So there's kind of two schools of thought when it comes to battery cables like this. One is to solder them, and the other is to crimp them. From my experience, it's much better to crimp them. If you solder them and they come loose, they'll generate a bunch of heat because they're making connection and disconnecting, and you can melt the solder right out of them and have them come apart. So ever since then, I've always crimped them. You can buy this hydraulic crimper for like 60 bucks on Amazon. It's definitely worth it in my opinion if you're gonna do a bunch of battery cables. All right, battery roughly installed. We still need to make a tie down bracket. I need to move the ground. I'm not gonna keep it where I just put it, but let's see, are we in neutral? Yep. That's weird. All right, well, we've had a bit of a debacle here. Basically, I wanted to just check and make sure it worked, you know, and the cables were good, the grounds were good, and it didn't work. Starter just clicked. So first thought was the ground wasn't good enough. So I relocated the ground wire, didn't change anything. I used jumper cables to run a ground all the way up to the front, didn't change anything. Tried the jump pack, didn't change anything. I hooked up another battery up here at the front to bypass those cables, wondering if it was just some crazy voltage drop, which I, knew it probably wasn't, but hey, you gotta give it a shot, right? Nothing, same exact thing, engine just clicks. So I'm trying to turn it over by hand, it's real tight. I pulled the plugs out, still really tight, still clicking. So I noticed when I was trying to turn it that the belt tensioner was flexing. So I loosened the belt, spun all the pulleys, everything spins fine except this guy. This is an adjustable belt tensioner that's brand new and it is completely seized up solid. So I took the belt off, went to crank it, it's still the same thing. Still the exact same thing. So plugs out, belt off. I can spin the engine over by hand easy. I've hooked up the battery a million different ways and it still will not turn over. It just clicks. So that leads me to believe the starter went bad. I usually find it hard to believe that a part that worked fine before just all of a sudden goes bad when you're putting a car back together. Well, usually common denominator is you're putting the car back together, but I've checked over everything I could. I've diagged this thing to the moon and back and I can't find anything else wrong. So we're gonna get a starter for it in the morning, put that in. I also got a replacement belt tensioner because the other part we've been waiting on, our drive shaft, is here. So I wanna get this thing lifted up, get this thing tossed in and see where we're at. All right, so we had them not paint this thing so that we could get it here a little bit faster. It was basically gonna take an extra day to ship it if they painted it. We wanted to get it ASAP since this is the one holdup of the car, so hopefully it fits. If it fits, then we'll paint it. Ain't no big thing. Throw some spray paint on her. Perfect. Check it out. We got a drive shaft. I was about to bolt it in, but like I said, still need to paint it. So we'll do that real quick. Otherwise, if we don't paint it now, we're never gonna paint it. So let me pull it back out. Let's get it painted. So while we waited for the drive shaft to dry, I wanted to go ahead and get the starter pulled out so that we could test it and get it replaced. And ironically, this car is very easy to work on because it's a small 4-cylinder. We've got a big engine bay, but this starter is one of the things that is not easy to work on. It is just in the worst possible place. There's one bolt that is incredibly difficult to get to, so it wasn't the most fun job to pull this thing out, so I'm really hoping this thing is bad. All right, well, we're gonna try and test this thing out. If it does work correctly, it doesn't mean it's not bad. I had the same issue plenty of times, but just recently with the starter on my Fummins, and it passed the test. It worked fine when we tested it, but it wasn't fine. We changed it and it fixed the issue. So, but if it doesn't work, then that'll at least tell us something. So basically what we're doing is we're grounding to the body of the starter because that's how it grounds. And then we are hooking power to the main power source, and then we're using this little jumper lead to trigger the starter. Oh no, it's broken. Sweet. I know you wouldn't normally think that'd be good, but at least if it's broken, that means that's our problem. Chasing our tail for nothing on a starter that worked fine a couple days ago. I don't know if you can see that, but it's like I think the Bendix is broken. So sweet, all right. Problem confirmed. We'll pick up a starter in the morning and we'll be pretty much ready to party. All right, we got the drive shaft tossed back up in here. I'm still waiting on some bolts. I need to either get some from Raldo and Josue or find mine. They're somewhere. but we need it in here, at least where it's gonna be for the exhaust part, because we could very easily build the exhaust in the way of the drive shaft. So now that we have that there, we have all our variables covered of what could be in the way, what is in the way, and now we can build, rebuild our section here and get from A to B. So the first thing we needed to do was cut a big section out of our old exhaust to now go around our trans mount. So I'm gonna cut as minimal as possible to start. I know this is pretty much the least I'm gonna be able to work with, and then we'll cut more off if we have to, but no reason to make more work for ourselves if we don't have to. So we went with the way this routed originally, and it's not gonna fit. It's hitting the trans mount. So we played around with some different locations, and we're able to orient it in a way that should allow us to go completely around the trans mount instead of under it. So next up was to grab some, so now we need some material. Luckily, we've got a bunch of leftover material from all these different projects that we've done over the years. So we just dig through my tote of 3-inch stainless and find some stuff that looks like it's gonna work. So now for the hard part, we have to figure out how do we wanna get from A to B? Do we wanna make some pie cuts? Do we wanna try to use some bends? Do we wanna use a straight? How elaborate are we trying to go here? So first thing I need to figure out is how tight of a radius can I get a 90 to be? You can only make a radius so tight, and I don't know if we have enough distance to use just regular mandrel bends, or if we're gonna have to resort to pie cuts, which is what I normally do. So I cut a pair of 90s. I cut the first one with a little bit of a leg on it, and then I cut the second one basically as short as I can get it to where we're not cutting into the 90. So we start mocking the piece up, and it's looking promising. Now it's, again, same kind of concept. It's not the same routing as we had before. We're gonna have to kind of cheat the end pipe to make it work, but it's looking like it might be doable. So I wanna go ahead and get these cleaned up, get the outside ground down, nice clean edge to weld to, get the insides cleaned up so we don't have any burrs in there. You know, they obstruct flow, but it just makes me feel better when they're all clean and fresh. And then we can start mocking everything up and taping it and seeing if it's gonna work at all. So to do that, we've gotta get the end portion of the exhaust out of the way. We're gonna have to cut it down a little shorter, but again, I wanna do minimal cutting, so I wanted to see how this all laid out and then try to cut it just enough to where we can connect A to B, connect the new pieces to the old pieces, and not have to do anything in between. Now, unfortunately, it's hard to be that precise, and we're close but no cigar. We've got a little bit of a gap. So now we've got to come up with a piece to go there. So first, we need to finalize our new piece section. We need to get it taped and get it marked exactly where we want it so that we don't have to worry about that changing and our new piece that we're trying to make not fitting. We also need to get the back section cleaned up and ready to weld. So once this is all in together, we don't have to take it all back apart to clean it up to get it ready to weld. So we start cutting a few little pieces. We've got everything mocked up in there, but it is a tricky combination. So I'm trying to get everything taped up. But as I'm moving all this stuff around, I'm risking the tape coming off of the pieces I already have and losing the progress I've made and basically having to start over. So I knew what we had at the start was good. I wanted to pull it out, get it all tacked up. So that was done and dusted. We didn't have to worry about it. Put it back in, and then all we've got to do is focus on this little attachment piece between the two. We're basically just trying to save our progress before we continue on to this next piece, so that's all we have to do, all we have to worry about keeping together. All right, well, we're close, but this is a really good example of why cutting apart the middle of an exhaust and connecting it back together is a lot harder than just building it the first time. Because as you're going through here, you have very little wiggle room. We have to get this very precise. If we were building this from scratch, you know, this would kind of point wherever and we could get it lined up down here. We have that wiggle room, whereas right now, trying to connect these two pieces, we need the exact right shape piece to fit in here. So you can see the piece we have fits really good on one side, not so great on the other. So I'm gonna try to make a piece fit there. If not, I can, cut this back some more, give me a little more time to get everything kind of squared away. But that's just more weld, more junctions, more pieces. So we're gonna try to make this work. If not, we've got other options. But so far it's turning out pretty good, pretty happy with it. We had to go completely around the trans mount, very different route than before. But luckily most of this piece still worked and we're still tucked up nice and high, almost just barely below the frame rail. I always like to keep any exhaust tucked up as high as possible, but especially in a car like this that we intend to run reasonably low, we don't want to have to worry about your exhaust smashing the ground. It kills me when I see cars with these exhausts that it just, could be 3-4 inches higher. It's a pet peeve of mine, tucked exhaust. So anyway, yeah, I'm gonna try to cut some more pieces. Just need to get the right shape piece in here. See what we can do. So after a lot of tinkering with different angles and different size combinations, we got a piece that fit good enough. It's not perfect. I don't love it, but it's gonna get the job done for this car and what this purpose is. It's fine. So we went ahead and tacked it in the car because any movement in this thing's not going to fit back because this is going into such a long straight section. If it's off by a degree, it's going to be off by inch, 2 inches, maybe even more at the end of it. So we tacked it in the car, pulled it out very carefully, and then just started welding it out. Now, some of this welds all right, but when you're welding new material to used material, it's not the best. You got to think that the exhaust that we're welding to has had exhaust gas going through it and all those deposits, so it's not the cleanest thing in the world. And you can see the difference between a bad fit up weld and a good fit up weld. The fit up is so crucial. If you have good fit between the two pieces, the welding is easy. If you have bad fit up, it doesn't matter how good of a welder you are, it's not going to look very good. But fortunately, with all of that stuff done, it honestly came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it overall. Sometimes it's not worth spending a ton of extra time to make something perfect that's going to be under a street car and get splashed with mud and dirty and all of that good stuff. All right, well, our exhaust rebuild is complete. Really, really happy with how that turned out for such a kind of quick project and minimal amount of pieces, really. It honestly turned out about as good as I could have hoped. It's still just as tucked as before, which is about as tucked as it can possibly get. Like I said, I try to keep these things as high up as possible. And this turned out pretty solid. I'm real pleased with that. Considering how much of a change it was from what was on there before, I mean, this is what we just replaced. This is a lot smaller, simpler piece. The whole thing was shifted over here. And this pie cut section is what tucked it up past the transmount. So, the routing's entirely different. This section's entirely different. And all in all, it's still nice and high. So that's really all I could hope for. Really glad to have this project out of the way. This is one I knew when switching to this T56 I was gonna have to do. And it's really the last big project we have. So hopefully we should be driving this thing here very, very shortly. I'm waiting on the starter. I would start it up so you could hear it with the exhaust, though it should sound the same as it did before it blew up. Who knows? I might even put the muffler back on, but that's a topic for another day. But yeah, we gotta get the starter in, go through a couple more little things, bleed the brakes, some little odds and ends, and we should be driving this thing. So hopefully next episode we'll be driving this thing around. We got new wheels for it. We got some more exciting stuff on the way. But for now, we are out of time. It's been a long few days, been bouncing back and forth between projects, so I'm just gonna go ahead and end it here, and in the hopes that I'll see you next time. So that being said, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.